Football would have never been the same again if the European Super League had been executed as planned. It would have torn the footballing world in half. The league was designed to profit only the most elite clubs of every league in Europe. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We shall first examine this proposed European League and how it would have affected European football dynamics. Let's get into this. What exactly was this proposed European Super League all about? Where to start? The European Super League would have been a breakaway league consisting of the creme de la creme clubs from all over Europe. The most successful and coveted clubs across Europe would have formed a single league, where each competed against each other. The proposed plan for the European Super League was first announced in April 2021. It faced a storm of substantial negative criticism from the governing bodies, fans, and football associations throughout Europe, and it took a big hit in its initial phase. Guess who was the mastermind behind the project? Drumroll please! Florentino Perez. The wily and insanely successful president of Real Madrid is a man whose influence in football is undeniable. Which teams were the founding clubs of the Super League? Real Madrid, Barcelona, Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal, Atletico Madrid, Manchester City, Chelsea, Tottenham Hotspur, AC Milan, Inter Milan, and Juventus were the core founding members of the European Super League. 3 other elite clubs were expected to join the Super League, but because the backlash against the proposed league was so intense, it died before it could take its first steps. What was the format of the European Super League? The format was pretty straightforward. 20 teams would be involved in the Super League, and the 15 permanent members would participate every year. There was no relegation or promotion. The permanent members were permanent, always. The other 5 clubs would have to earn their place on merit based on their domestic league performances. The top 5 clubs that performed the best in their respective domestic competitions would participate in the European Super League. After the teams are finalized, the competition will start with the teams split into 2 10-team groups. It will be a round-robin format, with each team having to play 18 games, home and away. The top 3 teams from each group will automatically qualify for the quarterfinals, while the 4th and 5th teams will battle in a 2-legged affair to advance to the next round. The quarterfinals and semifinals would again be a 2-legged tie, and the final would be a single fixture played at a neutral venue. In total, there would be 197 games every year. The European Super League would have replaced the UEFA Champions League and Europa League, as the fixtures were to be played midweek. This format wouldn't have affected the domestic league schedule. What was the core reason for the breakaway Super League? If we say anything other than financial gain, would anyone believe it? Of course not. The primary reason the European Super League was proposed was that the rich could stay rich and get even richer by controlling the money stream, because they know the majority of football fans worldwide are fans of the elite clubs in Europe. The premier clubs didn't want to share the profit with clubs that generated less revenue than those elite clubs did. The elite clubs believed that the other clubs were taking unfair advantage of their popularity among the masses. The backlash. Oh boy, the backlash. It was immense. The moment the proposed European Super League was announced, the fans, football associations, and every other being who were not part of the elite group rejected the idea. The Super League teams wouldn't have cared much if only UEFA and FIFA had objected to the decision, because they would have expected that. What put an immediate end to the proposal was the severe and heavy backlash from the fans of those elite clubs. It was overwhelmingly negative. The fans knew once the Super League began, it would become monotonous fast. There was no merit in the competition. Teams were guaranteed a place in the Super League every single year. The thrill from the most loved game in the world would have evaporated. There would be no joy or disappointment in qualifying or not qualifying from the tournament. Fans held widespread protests, and different news organizations organized polls. The results were overwhelmingly against the idea of the Super League. The greed of the elite clubs was not going down well with the match going and fans from around the world. Even during the COVID era, and before a game between Leeds United and Liverpool, fans put out a huge banner reading, "Earn it on the pitch, football is for the fans." Mass protests were held at the European Super League formation clubs. The heat was so much on the owners of these clubs that they had to put out statements denouncing any further involvement in the Super League. Liverpool owner John Henry released a video assuring Liverpool fans that the clubs won't be moving forward with the Super League formation and even apologized to the fans. UEFA and FIFA condemned the formation of the Super League. UEFA even threatened the clubs involved in the European Super League, saying they would be thrown out of the Champions League and Europa League competitions if they didn't revoke their decisions. FIFA also released a statement saying players would be barred from entering any FIFA competitions in the future, including the World Cup. The governing bodies of the respective leagues of the clubs involved in the Super League released a joint statement condemning the Super League and vehemently opposed the idea. Other clubs that weren't invited to join the Super League also joined the protest against forming a new league. The issue got so out of hand that politicians got involved in this saga. France President Emmanuel Macron sided with the UEFA and rejected the idea of a breakaway league. Players and ex-players were also against the idea. Liverpool's manager at the time, Jurgen Klopp, and players Jordan Henderson and James Milner didn't like the idea of a Super League. Gary Neville, Roy Keane, and Jamie Carragher also showed their displeasure. Pep Guardiola and Bruno Fernandes criticized the formation of a new Super League. As we said, the backlash was immense. What if the European Super League had happened? We talked about how things panned out after the announcement of the European Super League. But what if the formation of this new breakaway league was successful? What would have happened then? Financial monopoly. Imagine the financial monopoly the elite clubs would have had with the Super League. Currently, these clubs have to share the broadcasting revenue with other clubs in their respective leagues. But we all know that when the Super League is formed, that whole broadcasting revenue goes away with the elite clubs, and the Super League would be super rich with lopsided revenues. Player monopoly. Footballers want to compete at the highest level, and no matter how much good competition there would have been in domestic leagues, the players know that world-class players will probably play in the Super League with high wages. All the quality players would then want to move to the Super League clubs, thus handicapping the domestic league. The league's quality would take a hit overall, and the difference between the top and bottom teams would grow even further. Impact on UEFA competitions. With the elite clubs forming their breakaway league, UEFA competitions would lose their sheen because then they would have to induct lower quality teams, which would mean the quality of the competitions would also take a huge hit. With a domino effect, the revenue would have gone down. By the end of it, UEFA would go bankrupt, or worse, become an afterthought. Fan protests. We don't know if the elite boardroom even thinks about the fans, but it was the biggest reason the Super League did not happen. If it had ended up happening, we would have seen massive protests from the fans of the clubs involved in the Super League. We have already seen the trailer of fans protesting when the formation of the new league was announced. Had the league been formed, there would have been 10 times more protests. They might have even gotten violent, and in turn the games would have been affected by these protests. Legal battles. Do we think UEFA and FIFA would have let Florentino Perez and co. form a new league without a fight? There would have been huge drawn-out battles in the courts everywhere in Europe. An injunction might have been put in place to stop the league from even happening. Thousands and millions of euros would have been wasted on these legal battles. We don't know when the result would have come. The legal dispute would have hindered the domestic leagues as well. Bitterness between elite clubs and domestic clubs. This would arguably be the worst fallout from the Super League formation. There would be a great divide between the elite clubs and the not-so-elite clubs in the domestic league. Imagine the hatred Crystal Palace, Newcastle and Aston Villa would have for the Big Six English clubs or clubs like Valencia, Villarreal and Sevilla, who are already handicapped financially in their league, having to see Madrid and Barca become even stronger than they already are. The dynamics of the domestic leagues would change, and so would the relationships. It would all have turned sour real quick. So, there you have it. The European Super League is still not dead. There are talks of resurrecting it with tweaks to make it look more appealing so that fans will finally back the idea. Who knows what will happen in the future, but we do know how the first time went down. Give us your thoughts on the Super League and whether it does need to be formed in the future.